Christmas morning should have been pure joy. I was about to tell my family the news I'd been dreaming of sharing. I was pregnant with my first child. I imagined tears of happiness, excited hugs, maybe my mom already planning the nursery. Instead, when the words left my lips, my mother looked at me with ice in her eyes and said 5 words that shattered everything. "You're dead to me now." Then she added that I was out of the will, that she wanted nothing to do with me or my baby. I sat there frozen for exactly 3 seconds. Then I calmly reached into my purse, pulled out the carefully wrapped Christmas present I'd spent weeks preparing, placed it on the coffee table, and walked out of that house forever. What my mother didn't know was that inside that innocent-looking box was something that would destroy her world. My name is Rebecca Thompson, and I'm 28 years old. For most of my life, I played the role my family expected: the dutiful daughter of old Portland money, destined to marry well and produce well-bred grandchildren. My grandfather built a lumber empire back in the 1950s, and my mother Patricia has spent her entire existence acting like that makes us royalty. She belongs to the country club, hosts charity luncheons where wealthy women pick at salads and gossip about everyone beneath their social station, and has very specific ideas about who people like us should associate with. In her world, I should have married a doctor or lawyer by now, someone who could be discussed proudly at her bridge club gatherings. Instead, I fell in love with David Martinez. We met 3 years ago at St. Mary's Hospital, where I worked as a registered nurse. David came in after a motorcycle accident, nothing serious, just road rash that needed cleaning and bandaging. But while I worked on him, he kept cracking jokes, asking about my day, treating me like an actual person, instead of just the help. After years of dating men who saw me as a stepping stone to my family's money or arm candy for business dinners, David's genuine interest felt revolutionary. He was a tattoo artist with long dark hair, rode a Harley, and came from a working-class Mexican-American family. My mother took one look at him and decided he was destroying my future. The first Sunday dinner was exactly the disaster you'd imagine. My mother spent the entire meal interrogating David about his career prospects and retirement planning. My father, who usually stayed neutral in my dating life, kept making pointed comments about motorcycle safety and whether David had considered more stable transportation. Meanwhile, my younger brother Michael, who was 25 and still living in our parents' basement while supposedly finding himself, sat there smirking like he was watching his favorite comedy show. David handled it with incredible grace. He answered every invasive question honestly, talked about his plans to open his own tattoo shop, even complimented my mother's cooking. But I could see the calculation happening behind her eyes. This wasn't the son-in-law she'd envisioned when she mentally spent my future husband's investment portfolio. After David left, Mom cornered me in the kitchen while I loaded the dishwasher. "Rebecca, honey, I'm sure he's nice enough. But you have to think realistically. What kind of life can a tattoo artist provide? What would our friends at the club think? What about college funds for children? Retirement security?" I reminded her that I had my own career and could contribute to any future financial planning. She waved that away like swatting an annoying fly. "Nursing is a lovely profession, dear, but it's not a lifestyle. You need a husband who can support you properly." The criticism became constant background noise. Every phone call somehow circled back to David's shortcomings. Every family gathering included subtle digs about my phase, and when I'd settle down with someone appropriate. The really twisted part? My brother Michael had never held a job for longer than 6 months. His idea of ambition was reaching the next level in whatever video game he was currently obsessing over. Yet somehow, he felt entitled to lecture me about David's lack of direction, all while Mom paid his rent and car insurance. But I didn't know about that financial arrangement yet. That revelation would come later, and when it did, it would expose the stunning hypocrisy at the heart of my mother's righteous judgment. For now, I just knew that the family I'd grown up loving was treating the man I loved like he was beneath contempt, and I was caught in the middle, trying to build a bridge between two worlds that refused to meet. The proposal happened on a random Tuesday evening, while David and I were cooking dinner together in my downtown Portland apartment. He'd been telling me about something funny that happened at the tattoo shop, then suddenly got quiet. When I looked up from chopping vegetables, he was down on one knee, holding a ring he'd designed himself. "Becca," he said softly, "I can't imagine my life without you in it. Will you marry me?" The ring wasn't huge or ridiculously expensive, but it was absolutely perfect. He'd incorporated both of our birthstones into a unique design that represented our two lives coming together. It was thoughtful, personal, and more beautiful than any generic diamond from a jewelry store could ever be. I said yes immediately, not because I needed to think about it, but because I'd never been more certain of anything in my life. When I called my parents to share the news, you'd have thought I announced I was joining a dangerous cult. My mother went completely silent for about 10 seconds, which felt like an eternity, then launched into a prepared speech about how I was throwing away my potential. She actually used that exact phrase, as if my worth as a human being was somehow tied to my husband's income bracket. My father was marginally more diplomatic, but not by much. He suggested a long engagement to make sure this was really what I wanted. Even Michael got on the phone to share his wisdom about marriage being a big step, and maybe I should date around more before settling down. This coming from a guy who hadn't had a girlfriend for longer than 3 weeks since high school, but I was happy. David and I got married 6 months later in a simple ceremony surrounded by his warm, welcoming family and our closest friends. My parents attended but sat stone-faced through the entire celebration. Mom refused to smile in a single photograph. 6 months after the wedding, I discovered I was pregnant. David and I had planned to wait a year or two before starting a family, but sometimes life has other ideas. We were excited, maybe a little nervous about the timing, but genuinely thrilled about becoming parents together. I decided to tell my parents in person, thinking naively, stupidly, that maybe becoming grandparents would soften their attitude toward David. I actually believed that the reality of their first grandchild would matter more than their prejudices about his background and career. I should have known better. My mother's reaction was even worse than her response to the engagement announcement. She didn't congratulate me. She didn't ask about due dates or baby names or whether we needed anything. Instead, she immediately started calculating how this would affect the family's reputation. Would people think I had to get married? The fact that we'd been married for 6 months seemed irrelevant to her calculations. Then she said something I'll never forget. "Rebecca, you know there are other options you should consider. This doesn't have to define your future." She was suggesting I terminate the pregnancy. My own mother was suggesting I end my wanted pregnancy because the father didn't meet her social standards. I shut that down immediately and left. But the damage was done. The months leading up to Christmas were increasingly tense. My mother stopped inviting me to family gatherings. Michael would send occasional mocking text messages about how parenthood would destroy my freedom. Only my father would reach out sometimes, brief messages asking how I was feeling, but even those felt half-hearted. As Christmas approached, I made a decision. I would give my mother one final chance to choose love over pride, family over reputation, and I would prepare for the likelihood that she'd fail that test. So while I wrapped a beautiful Christmas present for her, I also prepared something else: comprehensive documentation of exactly who Patricia Thompson really was behind her charitable facade. I had no idea how soon I'd need it. Christmas morning arrived cold and bright. I was 7 months pregnant, my belly round and obvious under my winter coat. David offered to come with me to my parents' house, but I told him this was something I needed to do alone. He kissed my forehead and told me he loved me no matter what happened. I drove through familiar Portland streets decorated with lights and wreaths, carrying my carefully wrapped gift on the passenger seat. Part of me still hoped for a miracle, that maternal instinct would override her snobbery, that the sight of her pregnant daughter would trigger something human in her. When I arrived, the house looked perfect as always. My mother answered the door dressed immaculately, every hair in place, her expression carefully neutral. My father sat in his usual chair reading the newspaper. Michael was sprawled on the couch playing with his phone. "Merry Christmas," I said, settling into the armchair I'd sat in 1,000 times before. My mother offered me coffee, which I declined because of the pregnancy. That seemed to irritate her, this visible reminder of my condition. We made stilted small talk about the weather and traffic for a few minutes. Then I took a deep breath and said the words I'd been rehearsing. "I wanted to tell you in person that you're going to be grandparents. The baby is due in late February. We're very happy, and we hope you'll want to be part of your grandchild's life." The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's face went through several expressions: shock, disgust, calculation, before settling on cold fury. "I don't want you or that bastard in this family," she said, her voice like ice cracking. "You're dead to me and out of the will. You've made your choices, Rebecca. Now live with them." My father looked down at his newspaper. Michael actually laughed. I sat there for exactly 3 seconds, processing what had just happened. Then, with hands that didn't shake even though my heart was breaking, I reached into my purse and pulled out the Christmas present I'd wrapped so carefully. I placed it on the coffee table in front of my mother. "Merry Christmas, Mom," I said quietly. Then I stood up and walked out. I didn't cry until I got to my car. Then I sobbed so hard I had to pull over 3 blocks away. But underneath the grief, there was also relief. I'd given her every chance. She'd made her choice. And now I was free. What my mother didn't know was what that innocent-looking Christmas box contained. Inside was a USB drive loaded with documentation I'd spent months gathering. Financial records showing irregular withdrawals from the family accounts. My medical records documenting stress-related health issues, anxiety, and blood pressure spikes that started precisely when I began dating David. Emails and text messages showing her manipulation and emotional abuse. But the real bomb was the copy of my grandfather's revised will. 6 months before he died, my grandfather had changed his estate planning. He'd watched my mother's treatment of me with growing disgust. In his final will, he left the bulk of his personal fortune separate from the business holdings my parents controlled directly to me, explicitly bypassing my mother. She'd never known because the lawyer who executed the estate had kept that portion confidential per my grandfather's instructions, only to be revealed if certain conditions were met. One of those conditions was my mother attempting to disinherit me. Along with all the documentation was a handwritten letter I'd written on the hospital stationery from my night shifts, composed during the quiet hours when I'd processed my grief about losing my family. The letter explained everything. How her rejection had affected my health during pregnancy. How I'd tried to build bridges while she'd burned them. How I was done trying to earn love from someone who'd made approval conditional on my compliance. And how, as of that moment, she was blocked from my life, completely. I drove home to David, who held me while I cried. Then we made hot chocolate, sat by our little Christmas tree, and talked about the family we were building, one based on actual love instead of social performance. 3 days later, my mother's lawyer called. She'd opened the present. Our daughter Lily was born in late February, healthy and perfect. David cut the umbilical cord with tears streaming down his face. His parents, siblings, aunts, uncles, and cousins filled the hospital waiting room with flowers and balloons and genuine joy. The family I'd married into celebrated our daughter like she was the most precious thing in the world. My biological family sent nothing. I blocked all their numbers and focused on my new life. David's tattoo shop was thriving. I returned to work part-time and was promoted to charge nurse 6 months later. We bought a small house in a neighborhood with good schools. Lily was surrounded by love from grandparents who actually showed up, who babysat without conditions, who celebrated every milestone. Meanwhile, my mother tried repeatedly to make contact. She called the hospital and tried to go through my supervisor, claiming I was having postpartum mental health issues and needed intervention. My supervisor, Dr. Jennifer Walsh, shut that down immediately and told me I was one of the most level-headed new mothers she'd ever worked with. Then, when Lily was 8 months old, my brother Michael showed up at our house unannounced. He looked terrible, thinner, unshaven, wearing clothes that looked slept in. But what shocked me most was his expression when he saw Lily. Pure wonder, followed immediately by what looked like grief. "She's beautiful," he whispered. "She looks just like you did as a baby." "What do you want, Michael?" I asked, not inviting him in. "Mom and Dad are getting divorced," he said. That stopped me cold. My parents had been married for 32 years. The story came out slowly. After Christmas, my father couldn't handle how Mom had treated me. They started fighting constantly. Then Dad discovered something during the divorce proceedings. My mother had been secretly giving Michael $43,000 over 2 years. Money she told Dad was for household expenses and charity donations. $43,000 to fund Michael's entire lifestyle, while lecturing everyone about financial responsibility. While I worked double shifts to pay for nursing school. While she rejected David for being financially unsuitable. The hypocrisy was staggering. "She's been stalking you," Michael added quietly. "She hired a private investigator to get photos of you and Lily. She has a whole scrapbook. It's honestly creepy." I got a restraining order the next day. But Michael surprised me. He got his own apartment, found a steady job, and slowly proved he'd actually changed. He became the uncle Lily deserved, showing up consistently, keeping boundaries, never sharing information back to our mother. My father reached out once through a lawyer, asking to meet his granddaughter. I considered it carefully, then declined. Too much damage had been done. A year after that Christmas morning, David and I renewed our vows on Lily's first birthday, surrounded by people who'd actually supported us through everything. As we promised to keep choosing each other every day, I looked at our small but genuine gathering and felt complete. The little girl my mother had rejected now had a family who would never question her worth. Sometimes the best Christmas gift is discovering you don't need the people who never truly valued you. If this story resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to choose yourself over toxic family? Hit that subscribe button for more stories about finding strength when the people who should love you fail you completely.